It's a pleasure to be here. And unfortunately, I can just hang on your comments here about the opioid crisis. It's not been better. It's on the contrary. I think it's when we thought it couldn't get worse, it's gone much worse. And I will come back to that in a few seconds. So I'm here to present after what I think is one of the best quarters in the Orexo history. It is the best quarter if you look at what is continuously revenue streams that we generate. We have had better quarters, but that's always been because of one single big milestone. This quarter we actually had a really good result based on our own sales of Zubsolv in the US, and I'll come back to that in a few seconds. So, what is Orexo? For those of you who are new to the company, we are a company who have been specializing in drug delivery and formulation technologies. Based on that, we have produced 4 products that have been approved in multiple different countries. We have, since 2013, we have focused a lot to build our own specialty pharma company with our own commercial operations. And since 2016, we actually turned the company from an R&D company to a profitable specialty pharma company. And I'm quite proud to see that we have seen the profit and cash flows to improve from 16 into 17 and also into 18. So we're in a good trajectory from a cash perspective. We have a situation where, as a profitable company, we have a strong cash position that is growing. We are very close to 500 million SEK, or about $55 million US. And that gives us a lot of freedom from a strategic perspective and how we're going to take this company to the next level. And this has really been one of my targets. Today, we have the headquarters in Uppsala, where the company was founded. But we also have growing operations in the US. Where we are headquartered in Morristown, New Jersey. Looking at our pipeline and products, then the lead product and where we have basically 90% of our attention is on Zubsolv, which is a treatment of opioid dependence. I will talk a lot about Zubsolv in a few minutes. But we also have Abstral, which is a fast-acting fentanyl. So it's a very potent opioid, which is sold through a partner, Kyowa Kirin. It's doing very well in Europe, not that well in the US, where fentanyl has been very closely associated with the crisis of opioid addiction. Edluar is an insomnia product that was held by the Swedish company Meda, and when Meda was acquired by Mylan took over the global rights to this. One of the major happenings in our Q2 was our partner in Europe, Mundipharma, were launching Zubsolv for treatment of opioid addiction in Sweden and Germany. And now during the autumn, we are going to add more and more countries as we get pricing and reimbursement. The product was approved in the autumn last year. But in Europe, unfortunately, the pricing and reimbursement process in many countries is quite lengthy and time-consuming. But we expect to see more and more countries being added during the autumn. But it is fully in control of Mundipharma and not something that we are directly involved with. Then we have our pipeline, where I think I can take Orexo MPI very shortly. It's right now held by a company called Gesundta. It's a Swedish consortium of researchers who have a good idea of how to work with this active substance that was developed by Orexo and then taken further by Boehringer Ingelheim and now taken back to Sweden by this Gesundta. But here I promised them not to say that much about what target they're working on before we get a little further into the clinical program. And then we have our focus, our own internal development. And here we have 3 programs we're working a lot with, and I will talk a little more about, put them in context. But right now I can say the first one is OX382, which is based on the same active substance as Zubsolv. It's a buprenorphine product, but where Zubsolv is a sublingual product. That means you take it under the tongue, wait for it to dissolve, and then get the effect. We are trying to develop a product that you can swallow. We did one clinical trial in the beginning of the year. It didn't give the expected, or we say the results that we hoped for. We've gone back to the drawing table. We have some new ideas, and we're actually doing some new tests in animals now during the autumn to see if the new versions of this formulation can work. And I think this is an aspirational target for us to do. A lot of companies have tried that. But I think there's a lot of advantages with a medicine that you can swallow. And we've seen, and I can't come up with any other this category of medicine where a sublingual tablet is actually beating a tablet that you can swallow. This will make it much more easy for the patients. But it is difficult. A lot of companies have tried and failed. But I think we have some good hypotheses on how we can solve. And we might need to do several different tests on different formulations. But I'm we have a strong belief that we will succeed. The other two products we have are, I think the biology is not that complex. It's more the commercial landscape that can be, I think, can be a showstopper for this, and that's how differentiated will these products become based on the market. And the first one is OX124, which is opioid overdose rescue medication. The market leader in the US today, Narcan, I saw was sold this morning to a new company, Emerging Biosolutions, for $735 million. It's a nasal spray. We have looked at that product several years ago. We should probably have captured it at that time. But we have seen there are some shortcomings in the way it's work. And one of the shortcomings is that we see that a lot of the people who are dying today are dying from very potent fentanyls like carfentanil and fentanyl. And this product doesn't really work for about 30% of the patients. Knowing that, we're trying to solve that with our formulation. Also, we're seeing some patients who are getting what we call a double dip. So you get your rescue medication, and then, but when the naloxone set out, you still have enough opioid in your blood to get a new overdose. So you need a second dose, and we're trying to solve that as well. Can we do a product? I'm pretty certain we can do a product. The question is it good enough to be differentiated from Narcan, which is the market leader? So we will have the first clinical study going on basically very shortly within the next half year. Then we have OX338, which is an NSAID product. I say, why do you do an NSAID product? I think one of the issues that we have seen is that people were so convinced that opioids in the US were the solution to pain. So the biggest pharma market in the world were basically stopping to use NSAID products. No one was really looking at development because there's no money in it. No one wanted to use it. But now we can see the flip side of that people are dying, and actually a lot of the people who get addicted to opioids get their first exposure to opioids when they're in the emergency rooms or with the doctor or with the dentist. So actually looking back at some of the old insights and see how can we improve the formulation of that, I think is one of the solutions to the opioid crisis, and we're looking at that as well. Taking where we want the company to be, as I said back in 2013 when I became the CEO, we were an R&D company. We had a pipeline, we had a product that was quite close to be approved. We had a lot of hopes to that product. It took a little longer than we anticipated, but the last couple of years really been making this company financially solid to be able to take the next steps. And this is where we're focusing now. How can we build the pipeline and broaden the base of Orexo? And we're doing that from a position with about 500 million in cash. We have 325 million in debt. So we have a pretty strong net cash position. And I think that enabled us to compete for some assets that were basically impossible for us to do before without having to come to our shareholders and ask for more money. We basically generate cash flow ourselves, and we have a pretty strong base to stand from. And this is one of the visions and where we are going to work. And just looking at so the focus areas that we have is clearly opioid addiction, and looking at how do we attack opioid addiction. We have Zubsolv for treatment of addiction. OX382, if we succeed with a swallowable tablet, I think will be a new transformational medicine in this space. It's basically, it's a replacement of Zubsolv and other products in this category. One of the comorbidities of opioid addiction, unfortunately, is that you die. You get an overdose. And here we see that the product that exists in the market today have some shortcomings that we're trying to solve with our formulation technologies. OX124 is that category. And then we have OX338, which is basically a prevention. When we talk to patients and physicians, did they get the first exposure? It is not at a rock concert that someone gave them heroin. Basically, most of them, it is when they got an injury, sports injury in college was different. And then there are some of us who just feel good when we get an opioid. Most of us will feel nauseous and tired, but some of us will feel uplift and quite kind of what they would say, I feel, for the first time in my life, I feel really good. I feel like my life is easy. And I think that is the category that are subject to become opioid addicted. So looking at Zubsolv, very shortly, what we have done is that we're taking the market leader, and the market is something called Suboxone. When we start to develop Zubsolv, it only existed as a big tablet. It was dissolving quite slowly, had a nasty taste according to patients. we said, okay, we can do small tablets. We can do something that is tasting good, which is convenient. So we set out to do something that is smaller, more convenient, and more pleasant for patients. In the meantime, Suboxone came in a new shape in the form of a film, which is like a small piece of paper you put under the tongue. It still doesn't really have a pleasant taste, but it took away some of the shortcomings of the old tablet. But when we tested our product compared to the film, clearly the patients preferred the convenience. Then from a maybe a little naive European perspective, I think it's good to develop a product that is where you can get the same effect with less medication. This is an opioid. We are treating opioid addiction with what you can say an other opioid, but it's what's called partial agonist. So it's something that doesn't really give you the same. You can't get high. It's very difficult to get an overdose. There are some hypotheses it's not really as addictive, but clearly it makes people able to work. But we said it's still something you would like to lower the dose. Then when we start to commercialize it, we realized that a lot of the patients, to finance the physicians, actually resold some of the prescription on the street. And then the lower dose was not positive because you got less paid for Zubsolv. And it's been one of the battles we've been fighting, but I think we have found ways to overcome it. And today, clearly, we are quite profitable. And we are, if you look at reformulation products, we're one of the products that have done the best for quite a few years. One thing that has been an issue for us, and for those of you who know Orexo and has been hanging over us like a wet carpet, both from a business development, corporate development, but also from a share price perspective, is that we have had a patent litigation against Actavis, which started in May of 2014. If you look at our share price, that's kind of where it started to go down. I think we are in a good track to reverse the decision from the district court to one of our three patents to 2032 was invalidated. We had an appeal in October last year. A hearing, normally you get a result within 5 months. It's now on Tuesday next week. It's 11 months, and I'm giving up to give any guidance. I don't know if it's an excuse, but I say it's the chairman of the bench of the judges. She's 92 years of age, and she's very clever, she's very smart, so no problem with that, but she's a little slower, and we can see that on all of her decisions. The one who takes a lot of time is actually her decisions. But it must be soon. I say every day that goes, we're one day closer, maybe it comes tonight. But we are very optimistic, and I think that is part of the rebounds in our share price during the summer, is that we did a rush in the spring to talk to institutional investors and explain more about the situation, about our patents. And I know some institutional investors, especially from Germany, went into the stock after I've done some due diligence on the legal situation. So clearly they believe we have a strong situation in the patent portfolio. And I think that is actually, when you saw during the summer, we were pretty well performing. Then on top of that, we had a very good second quarter, of course. So to the opioid addiction, the headlines, I could fill 10 pages with this. 3 years ago, I couldn't fill one because there are no front pages. If I should find something, it's a celebrity who's put into some rehab center. But now this is on the front line. And it's not strange, because when you thought it couldn't get worse, and as I started, we saw last year more than 60,000 people were having a drug overdose, most of it involving opioids, nearly all, but not all. And then when the data come just 2 weeks ago in New York Times, we actually broke our curve here. So it's now 72,000 people who died. So when you saw a curve pointing upwards that you thought couldn't go more steep, it's actually accelerating. And what is happening in the US is that cheap fentanyl and carfentanil is used as the elephant tranquilizer, is coming into the heroin distribution chain. People want to buy the heroin that is the strongest, and for the dealers of heroin, they can buy cheap fentanyl, which probably come from China. And then to mix that, it's literally, it's not visible for the eye, the variation of what you should put into this heroin. That is the difference between people dying and people get a little bigger high. And that is what is happening right now. People are dying from fentanyl and carfentanil. It's not from heroin, it's of course heroin also, but it's really because there's no way anyone who is not a chemist who can do that. And I can tell you, when we are working with these opioids, our scientists are using basically space suits. They kind of walk around in these big suits to avoid any exposure, because they know the smallest grain of this could kill them. And here we see drug dealers who are sitting in a kitchen and using teaspoons and just mixing it around. this is what killed people. It's also killing people in Sweden, and right now there's no indication of this to stop, because there's obviously a supplier of very cheap fentanyl coming into the distribution chain in the US. So what are they doing? Here we have two relatively famous, at least for US listeners, Chris Christie and Patrick Kennedy, two of many who have really engaged themselves into this. And I think the big upside for us and everyone else working with opioid addiction is that is a movement to open up for more treatment. Today, even though they're talking and they are opening up more and more, we still see one of the biggest issues, there's a lack of access to physicians who can treat this. And to get access to treat it in the US, you need a special certification. But now we hear again and again, key stakeholders in the US that we actually need to make this a primary care product. This is the only way we can get a national coverage, is to make primary care physicians to treat those who have a light addiction, and those with a more severe addiction should then go to a specialist, just like we're treating depression. And I think even though we're not there yet, it is moving, and if that should happen, you're going from an active number of prescribers, which is around 5,000 to 6,000, to a potential prescriber base of more than 300,000. Does that have an opportunity for the patients? Definitely, but of course also for Orexo, because suddenly you're broadening out who can prescribe our products to many more patients. Looking at the market in the US, it has been growing very good. It's a very strong growth at the moment. I saw some updates from an analyst this Monday. It's now 15% growth over the summer compared to last year. It's very much driven by what we call the public sector. That is patients with an insurance but by Medicaid, which is for people with a low income in the US. That is really driving that. It has moved from what was commercial segment when we launched, were by far the largest, but today Medicaid is the largest segment. And actually even growing now is Medicare, which is for retired people. And that is actually quite scary at the moment. You see more and more addicts that are north of 60 and have retired. So it's actually something that hits everyone, not only the young and famous who are going to a rock concert. For Zubsolv, we have seen historically that the main driver for us, and this is coming back to how do you turn lemon into lemonade, and when the bitter taste of the market is that patients prefer the higher strength of the original brand, we go to the insurance companies and say, actually, do you know a lot of your products that you finance is used by patients who have not got it prescribed. So you're basically, as an insurance company, paying for someone else. And that have succeeded. It worked very well with United. We just got our United contract renewed. Wellcare is just running. We got Humana, we got Envision exclusive. CVS Caremark, after a few years, decided to take us back early this year. And every time we see these market access changes, we see a big jump in our prescription. And what's really encouraging for me is especially CVS Caremark. We're actually just been added back in competition with both generics and Suboxone, but we have by far outgrown CVS Caremark during the first half year than the market. So we're taking market share in CVS Caremark, and we earn much more on the products when we're non-exclusive than we do in the other products. So it is, I think, from a volume perspective, it's been a good summer. I think market share wise, even though I would like to see the market share growing, we're growing with the market. The market has a strong double-digit growth. We do have price increases in the space as well. But to really outgrow, we need to have some new market access agreements. Now we are getting close to get all of the market access positions for next year, so I have good hopes that we have some positive news to share during the autumn. Definitely so far we seem to regain all of the positions that we got last year. So Express Scripts, for example, came out a few weeks ago. So what does this mean from a profitability perspective? And now I actually just looked at the US business as alone. In the US we have been profitable for a while, but really looking at where we're moving, the second quarter gave us more profits in the US in terms of gross profit or EBIT than what we had. The first half year gave the same as we had for the full year last year. But what is even more encouraging is if we're looking a little ahead, where we'll spend a lot of time in the companies to improve our profitability and improve our gross margins, because we have a massive turnover. Our turnover in the US is north of $150 million. So every % you can squeeze on the gross profit and you can work on the rebates and the pricing is a lot of money on the bottom line. So working on the cost of goods is something that we have worked intensively with. It's taking a little time, and we have gone on some issues, but right now we are basically on track to deliver what we think compared to last year, we see in the end of the year we're down to about 20% lower. Next year we will be 25% or more, at least 25% lower than what we saw in 2017. And if you actually start to calculate how much money that means on the bottom line, it's quite a lot of money. And we continue to work on this. So I think there's a lot of hope for us to continue to pressure down our cost of goods. We know that in the event we should have generic competition, our cost of goods in this environment is absolutely competitive with the generic products that are in the market. So we could, even in that environment, we could easily price compete with where we are at the moment. So just rounding off on our financials, saw very good growth in the US Q2 over Q1 with more than 20%. But actually, if we look in local currency, we're getting closer to 30%. So in US dollars, it's closer to 30% increase. Now coming into Q3 with the US dollars increase and probably very uncertain election outcome, I think we have a good position for even Q3 on the dollar. Looking at our total net revenue, we're close to 700 million on a 12-month running basis, which is turning into a profitability where if we're just looking at the last 12 months, we had an EBITDA of about 115. We have not reached that on a full year yet, but it's a good trajectory for the year. And from a cash perspective, I talked about 500 million. So just rounding it off, I think the storyline about Zubsolv is we are in the area, Orexo, we are in an area that is growing in the US. We're in an area that every politician in the US need to find a solution because a lot of the voters in the US have this close into their life. I think if I was presenting in the US and asked people to raise a hand with someone in their closer circle of friends and family who have been exposed to opioid addiction, everyone would raise their hand. That's the situation in the US at the moment. We're working from a very strong cash position. We have a pipeline, which I think is interesting. It's interesting to see that the competitor to Orexo 124 was valued as $735 million this morning. Of course, they are the incumbent, but I think if we can do something that is better, that of course should have a good opportunity. Market access has been a significant driver. So far, we're at least keeping the position for next year, and we're working hard to have some good positive outcome also for next year. But there's definitely not a threat as I see it in market access. It's more an opportunity to improve where we are. We have launched in Europe, just started before the summer. In Sweden, it started in June. Everyone who's been working pharma in Sweden know that July is a dead month for launching products. So you do that basically in August and September. And Germany has their vacation in August. So I think before we really can expect to see something, we need to go in the end of the year. Then we're business development. We have a lot of dialogues and we have been actually bidding for a couple of products, but here we are in a Swedish environment, and I think we are a little more conservative than my US competitors. So we're not doing a deal just for doing a deal. We're doing a deal when we think it's a good opportunity, and that also means we step away for opportunities. Clearly, I should have bought Adapt 3-4 years ago, but at that time Orexo had no money to invest, so it was not really an alternative, as they just got valued to an immense amount of money. And then we're waiting for this decision, the patent litigation. I know a lot of you have been following us, have expected, just like me, it would come in the summer. But right now I can't. The record is a little more than 11 months it have taken to a decision, and we hit 11 months next Tuesday. So it can't be a long way from now. So thank you. And just as a final, we will have some copy of the presentations out in the coffee room if you're interested. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikolai.
Thank you.
Very interesting. So basically, you could sum it all up with say that you have had a good year.
Yeah,
more or
so
less.
far at least. Yeah, and looking good for the second half. Yes.
Yeah, a very strong period financially. Does that meet your expectations, or is it better?
We haven't communicated our expectations, but we did expect first half to be negative, and we were positive first half. So we expected Q1, we guided that it would be negative, but we also expected first half to be negative. But we actually made up the loss in Q1 even faster, and we did get a milestone. Some of you could argue in the Q2, okay, you got a milestone, but if you deduct the milestone, we still made a positive first half. And as we were guiding negative when we expected the milestone, I think you can conclude first half was better than we expected.
Good point. I turn to the audience. Anyone has any questions? Yeah?
If you win this lawsuit, do you expect to be compensated for past sales?
So we have not lost sales yet because they have not launched the product. So what we have lost is we paid more than 200 million Swedish kronor for the lawsuit. And here, unfortunately, as we lost on one of the patents in the district court, then our opponent can say we had a legitimate reason to basically file a patent litigation. If we had won everything in the district court, that could have been an opening for being compensated for part of the cost base. But where we are right now, we can't do that. So unfortunately, I think this is a little getting a parking ticket, and the only thing you can hope for is to keep the car. So, and I think we're in a good track to keep the car, but I don't think we can get any compensation for it. Yep.
What is the average time of treatment for a Zubsolv patient?
The average patient is on Zubsolv about 6 to 9 months. Unfortunately, the average patient who stop also come back. So it's the people who have succeeded to keep themselves abstinent is on a single-digit %. So even though you get abstinent for a period of time, then what often happens is you get a personal crisis or something, and you get an injury and you get exposed to opioids again, and then you get into the same once again. And I think that's so far there's no disease-modifying product in the market. So. Unfortunately, we see a lot of the patients come back.
So that's interesting in the view of your other projects in the opioid portfolio. Your strong financial position, does that enable you to speed up the process in those projects, or do you stick to the plan?
It enables us to take a little more risk, I think, to speed up in the terms of doing a little broader phase 1 trial. So we, on our OX124, normally we would test a phase 1 on a drug delivery maybe of 5 to 10 healthy volunteers, and you wouldn't have any control arms. But in this one we are going with, I think, 4 different arms in the phase 1 trial, which is a little unique. So we actually even have an active comparator. And that, if we succeed, would make it much faster because we're also testing several different formulations. So that, I think, is due to our financial strength, so we can do that and don't bet on one. But if the one we had betted on had succeeded all the way, I think we would still have the same time. It's really, for us, the thing that takes time is of course the clinical trials, but it's as much the manufacturing and get stability data. You can't find, if you need to show that this product is stable for 12 months, of course you can do some acceleration, but really to get the label and the shelf life, you need to wait for 12 months. And that's, I think, is part of what is taking time for some of these products.
Yeah. So with 1 minute left during your time, what would you yourself consider to be the most important upcoming milestone or trigger for Orexo?
There's no doubt, it's the patent litigation. So if that one is going positive, it's would be fantastic news for us, and then there's no turning back. It's just full speed ahead, finding some new business development opportunities. And of course, you can't do M&A, or, for example, or working on that front if you have a share that is very impacted by very binary decisions. So having that behind us, I think, will open up more avenues for the company.
We sure cross our fingers.
Thank you.
And thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you for your attention.